In the middle of the 12th century, deep within the river valley of western Bohemia, a small group of monks arrived at a place where few would have dared to build anything at all. Surrounding them were dense forests, muddy floodplains, and dangerous swamps shaped by the waters of Strela River. And yet, this was exactly where Duke Vladislav II and his wife Gertrude chose to found a monastery in 1144. Hello, today we are visiting the town of Plasy, home to one of the most important monasteries in the Czech Republic. Located in western Czechia, just north of Pilsen, the Monastery of Plasy is the place filled with fascinating history, remarkable architecture and stories that shaped the region for centuries. In this video, we will explore the history of the monastery, discover the vital role monasteries played throughout the centuries, and meet the influential figures behind Plasy. So sit back, relax, and join me as we dive into the history of Monastery of Plasy. In the beginning, the monks of the monastery held a small estate, but acquired more and more villages throughout the gifts, purchases, and exchanges with the Bohemian noblemen and rulers. Almost every monastery in the world is or was part of some order, and the Plasy were of the Cistercian order. According to the strict rules of Cistercian order, monks were expected to cultivate undeveloped land and build large agricultural estates. Since the countryside on Plasy was already settled, the monks sometimes dissolved villages and replaced them with highly organized farming estates, worked by monks and peasants. These estates made the monastery largely self-sufficient and turned it in one of the region's major economic and political powers. By the medieval times, the monastery had become one of the wealthiest institutions in Bohemia. A papal confirmation issued by the Pope Innocent IV in 1250 lists 11 large monastery estates, numerous villages, and several churches under its control. The monastery reached its golden age during the reign of King Wenceslav I, who is said to have stayed here personally on several occasions. At that time, the monastery sorely drifted away from the original ideas of the order. Instead of relying purely on agricultural production, it began collecting feudal rents and functioning more like traditional noble estates, technically collecting taxes from the people. When we think of monasteries in medieval Europe, many people see them mainly as centers of religion and learning. In reality, their role in medieval society was far broader and far more influential. Monasteries were often key aspects of medieval colonization and economic development in remote regions. They helped establish new settlements, cultivated land, introduced new agricultural methods, and became important economic centers. Before local administration of kings and dukes became widespread, monasteries often exercised significant authority over their lands. They collected taxes and rents and organized economic life within their domains. Especially during the early medieval period, the church held enormous influence over society, and monasteries played a central role not only in religion but also in political, economic, and social development in Europe. Of course, monasteries also served as important centers of charity, education, and knowledge. They provided shelter and food for the poor, cared for the sick, and offered assistance to travelers and pilgrims. In a time when schools were rare and literacy was limited, monasteries preserved knowledge through their libraries and scriptoria, where monks copied manuscripts and recorded historical events. Many of the historical events we know of today were preserved by monasteries, as they were often the only institution keeping written records of history. They became some of the few places where education and writing and scholarship could survive and develop during the medieval period. The 15th and 16th centuries marked the dramatic decline of the monastery. During the Hussite Wars, much of its property was seized by surrounding nobles, and by 1421 the monastery had lost most of its lands. Plasy itself was burned by Hussite forces, while King Sigismund sold off the remaining property to noble families. The monastery importance collapsed, the monks fled, and for decades the convent struggled to survive. Although some lands were later recovered, the 16th century brought further financial hardship, and growing unrest among the peasants pushed the monastery deeper in decline, and by 1608 only a handful of monks remained the once powerful monastery. During the Bohemian Revolt at the beginning of the 30 Years' War, Plasy Monastery firmly supported the Habsburg monarchy. In response, the rebel armies attacked and plundered the monastery and many surrounding villages, while foreign troops devastated the region and again in 1619 and 1620. According to the contemporary accounts, by the end of 1620, almost nothing remained in Plasy except a single shepherd. The monastery only began to recover after the Habsburg victory at the end of the 30 Years' War, when Emperor Ferdinand II restored much of his confiscated property in 1623. This allowed the monks to rebuild the devastated complex, and over the following decades, new Baroque buildings gradually rose from the ruins of the old Gothic monastery. In the 17th century, Plasy had once again become a wealthy and influential monastery in western Bohemia. In the 18th century, the monastery entered a new golden age. After decades of war, destruction, and decline, Plasy Monastery once again became one of the wealthiest and most influential monasteries in Bohemia. Its estates recovered economically, trade and agriculture flourished, and the monks began an ambitious transformation of the entire complex. The old medieval monastery was gradually rebuilt in modern Baroque style, reflecting the wealth and renewed confidence of the Catholic Church after the 30 Years' War. Some of the most important architects and artists of the era were invited to work here. New buildings, halls, chapels, and administrative structures were constructed, while the monastery also became an important cultural and intellectual center of the region, once again. By the 18th century, Plasy had transformed from a ruined medieval monastery into a magnificent Baroque complex that symbolized both spiritual authority and economic power. In renewed prosperity, an ambitious Baroque reconstruction began, but the monastery was never fully completed. In 1785, Emperor Joseph II ordered the dissolution of Plasy Monastery as a part of sweeping reforms aimed at limiting the power of religious orders across the empire. The monastery's vast estates and wealth were seized by the state, bringing centuries of monastic life in Plasy to an abrupt end. And you cannot talk about Plasy without mentioning the Metternich family. One of the most powerful noble dynasties in 19th century Europe, the Metternichs transformed the former monastery into their aristocratic residence and left a lasting mark on the region and on the rest of Europe. After the Napoleonic Wars, the Austrian Empire was nearly bankrupt, forcing the state to sell many former monastic estates. And in 1827, the vast Plasy estate, including more than 50 villages, was purchased by Clemens Wenzel von Metternich, the influential Austrian chancellor who helped the shape of European politics after the Napoleonic defeat. The estate was enormous and incredibly valuable. It included breweries, ironwork, sawmills, mines, distilleries, fish ponds, and a huge area of agricultural land, making one of the largest estates in Bohemia. Metternichs transformed the former monastery into a noble residence. For generations, the Metternich family continued to manage the estate from Plasy. Although their political influence gradually declined, by the late 19th century, the monastery remained closely tied to one of the most influential aristocratic families in European history. After World War I, the Metternich estates were included in the first stage of Czechoslovak land reform, during which the state redistributed large noble estates in an effort to reduce aristocratic power and transfer land to the smaller owners. Large parts of Plasy estate and its surrounding lands were taken over by the state. In the following years, thousands of hectares were divided among new owners, small farmers, or recognized in the smaller residential estates. This process transformed the entire region around Plasy, and by the mid-1920s, the once enormous noble estate had been largely broken up, ending centuries of aristocratic land ownership and opening the way for new settlement and development. During World War II, the monastery complex served as headquarters for the German military, but by the final days of the war, the region around Plasy found itself near the demarcation line between the advancing Allied forces and the Soviet army, placing the monastery at the center of final moments of the conflict. In 1948, the monastery in Plasy was taken over by the state. The complex was used by the various institutions, offices, archives, schools and museums. But over time, it suffered from neglect and inappropriate alteration that damaged its historical character. And in 1963, a civil defense shelter was built inside the complex, causing significant damage to the Baroque underground structures. During the second half of the 20th century, the site was also used by agricultural cooperatives and state farms, which managed surrounding land until the end of the century. After the fall of communism in 1989, the monastery complex was left in poor condition after decades of neglect and its unsuitable use under the communist regime. In the years that followed, extensive restoration projects gradually brought the monastery back to life. Today, Plasy Monastery has once again become the cultural and historical heart of the town. Visitors can explore beautiful restored Baroque halls, museums, exhibitions and historical collections. while the local cafe and the nearby brewery help create a lively atmosphere around the complex. Thanks for watching! I hope you have enjoyed the new video and consider leaving a like and subscribe for more fascinating history. Stay tuned for more videos and have a great day!